Okay, so thanks for coming, guys. I'm excited. This is in terms of stuff that excites me and gets me, rejuvenated as a coach. How many of you, just a show of hands, live hands or virtual hands, whatever, have actually read the book Atlas of the Heart, Brené Brown's newest book? Okay, so we've got.
Haven't started really reading it.
Right. Okay. So we've got a couple of you, so a handful of you who have read it. Some of you who probably have it, like Catherine, and are going to start reading it. Haven't read it, hoping, yes. Okay, thank you. So I got this book. This was one of these hilarious things that Alan and I did where I asked, well, I didn't even ask for it, but I decided to buy myself the book right before Christmas, like 2 days before Christmas, because I couldn't resist and I wanted to spend all day Boxing Day just reading it. And then, of course, so I had my copy, and then I opened the copy from Alan under the tree, which of course he'd gotten me. So I had 2 copies of this book, and I feel like it's maybe one of the most important books ever written. And I don't feel like I'm being dramatic or overstating anything. I think that this work that Brené Brown has been doing, I mean, she has gotten so popular and pop culture-ish, and, I don't know how people feel about her. I think she's brilliant. I think what she's doing is amazing, to take it from academia and bring it into lay people talk. And I know she gets criticized by many people as being a sellout and all that stuff. Regardless of all that, I think that she has probably done something. She did something with this book that has never been done ever in the history of ever, where her book it was a #1 best-selling book. So it became the world's best-selling book before there was even a physical book. So it became a bestseller in pre-orders before there was a book. If this isn't like encouraging and optimistic about the place that the world is in right now, I mean, we have been in a dark, dark place. And in that sort of like, I think a lot of us have felt the divisiveness of the world right now. We have felt this like shutdown where all of a sudden people are getting really judgmental, and we're even dehumanizing other people and all this kind of stuff. But amongst that, I think it's really important to celebrate the fact that a book like this can become a bestseller. Is like, the world is dying for this. I really think we got to focus on the fact that people's hearts have got to be opening at the same time as some portion of the world may be closing down. There's another portion of the world opening up and stepping into stuff like this. Sorry, Al just wants my attention here. The computer stop recording. Q&A. Tessa is staying. Yeah, cool. No, take the book card. I'll call you later. Okay. All right. So I think that there's something really, really, a few opening things here before we get into the content. We're going to go, deep into the content of the book here. I think what's really, really interesting is this book, by her own description, is sort of the opening of the book really talks about language, how imperative it is. Language is the portal that we have to express our experience, to express our behaviors. I mean, language is the portal for just about every experience that we try and convey to others and have connection and all of that stuff. And the first part of the book is really about that language. How do we actually learn in a nuanced way what we really want to express so that we can have connection with others? The middle part of the book is really going through these emotions and these states, which gives us such an incredible way to make distinctions, not only between emotions that we are familiar with and that we think we may know the definitions of. She clarifies so many things here that are just nuanced in the familiar emotions, but she groups them in this way where we get acquainted all at once with this clump of emotions that we tend to use synonymously. We just kind of throw them around, and I'm going to speak to that as coaches, how I certainly, reading this book was such a humbling experience of, there were moments where I felt like I was celebrating how wise I am in my knowledge of, emotional and how I've studied emotions and action and behavior and put it all together. And then other moments where I felt like, wow, I mean, it has just like pointed right in the center of what I have been misunderstanding, what I've been doing wrong, why I haven't in certain cases been getting the results that I could have been getting had I had this prior to my own coaching experience. So the roller coaster of that was pretty wild and awesome. But that's the middle part. And then the end is actually the map. So the end is where she actually, oh, cool. Okay. So the end is where she actually maps this out, where she actually finds a way to take all of these emotions. Yes, it's now available on audio, guys. So the book is available, and it is just as of last week, I think, available on audio. Which they have cleverly marketed because she has additional commentary in the audio. So those of us that have bought the book 3 times are still going to pay more money to get the audio. So that map at the end, we probably won't have time. Well, we certainly won't have time to go there today. But just understand it's a really, really, really cool cut into the different areas that we coach in. So these clumping, I want to address these kind of clumpings of emotion. So what's really interesting is how some emotions are disguised as other emotions. And so what Brené Brown speaks to as being probably one of the most interesting things that she discovered doing all of this work is that emotions have these sort of what she calls their near, I forget what she calls them, near enemies. So it's never the opposite of the emotion that hurts us. So if I'm feeling really, really bad and I call somebody for help, for a compassionate voice or place to be, and if they act like a total asshole to me, I mean, if they just act mean and they show me like anger or resentment or something, I'm pretty clear on what's going on, right? Like that's unlikely to be overly destructive because I can recognize it for what it is. What's dangerous for all of us sometimes is what we call these near sort of relatives of near enemies. So something like I'm looking for compassion, and what I get is actually pity. Or I'm looking for compassion. Sorry, if I'm looking for sympathy, what I get instead is pity. I'm looking for compassion, and what I get instead is control. So the near enemy of compassion is actually control. So what we tend to do is I may be asking for someone to offer me a compassionate response, or someone's asking me to offer a compassionate response. And the tendency is to control the situation. So the example she gives, and I'll use that because it's most accurate, is if an employee or something is upset because they've had this really difficult situation come in, and so they say, I'm sorry, I didn't get the work done because this happened at home and my mother's sick or whatever. And as a response, I say, okay, you know what? We're just going to, shift things around so that you can get your work done later and somebody else can take over. And I go ahead and I look at the situation and I try to control the situation to alleviate it from her. That's not a compassionate response. That's a control response, but it can very easily resemble compassion. And the person feels now as though they should be feeling better because it's disguised as compassion, what I've done, but somehow they don't, right? Because what I actually did was control the situation as opposed to sit in connection, offer compassion. And then together, after I've done that, actually brainstorm together for what a solution may be. So situations like that are what I think are so insightful as a coach, because we're in this position where what we're aiming to do is to help. But we don't want to get caught in help, which is often, not often, can be described here as the shiny side of control. So I'm going to back all the way up. So why this matters, these nuanced, yeah, of course, right? Yeah, everyone saw there Catherine's post, of course, right? We all do that with our children. You know what? I'm going to go there right now because it's so cool. When I learned about compassion, when I read her book and actually read compassion in the proper way, it was such a beautiful example of when your child comes to you and says, I had this really tough experience at school because this kid was bullying me and I really felt stupid. And then I didn't know what to do. So I said all this awkward, weird stuff, which just made it worse. And I feel really bad right now. As a parent, the temptation, and I think as a coach and as a friend and a number of different roles, the temptation would be to go in and control the situation in about 100 different ways, right? Compassionately control the situation, offer solutions of what she could do next time, offer solutions for how she might feel better now, change her state, talk about the future when this won't matter, talk about any number of things that are going to try and sort of diminish this experience and change this experience. And you're going to, as a parent, try to stop the suffering or change the suffering, even in the most kind of sophisticated, mature ways. Compassion would be this. Compassion would be sitting down with your kid and saying, I know what it feels like. I have felt humiliated before. And I have felt alone and confused. And why don't we sit here for a minute together? And you stay in that space with your child until there's a sense of connection, until there's an opening or a space. And then you ask the child that you're with, you ask the person that you're with, tell me what it felt like, tell me what it feels like. And only from there, once you've shared the experience, compassion is actually sharing the human experience of what somebody's going through, relating to them that way, not trying to compassionately solve with a solution that you've come up with. And it's so hard to do. You never stay there, right? You never stay in this sort of shared state. But what that connection will do is it will actually create an opportunity then to move into those compassionate solutions and everything else that'll come with it. Okay. Now I'm going to go to where I was actually going to start. So learning to label emotions with more nuanced vocabulary can be absolutely transformative. So your superpower as a coach is knowing the power and the connection between the way that we feel, the way that we think, and the way that we act. So the way that we feel, all of you probably trained with us are going to bring to mind strategies, right? Which is sometimes the bane of your existence as a coach. But all it is a way, like a strategy in itself of figuring out the connection between how somebody feels, how somebody thinks, and how somebody acts. So if you trust your sense of how to make a connection, if you as a coach can just guide yourself through the experience with your client of right now they're having some kind of story that they're telling me, some kind of experience, direct experience, and they're trying their best to express that or to convey it through language, which is tremendously limited when we bring it into the context of emotion. To the degree, I mean, none of us live in this world because we're doing what we do, but when they do research, usually there are 3 emotions that people can easily identify: happy, sad, and angry. That's your average human being walking around can identify happy, sad, and angry. I mean, imagine trying to express the need for help when that's the limit of your vocabulary, right, to express things. In this book, she identifies 87 emotions and states. So one of the things that often our clients are doing and that we do for ourselves is we try to take the edge off, right? So all of us kind of feel as though we have to take the edge off of things. We sort of numb ourselves out in many different ways, and we all have pretty successful ways of doing that, right? So in order to take the edge off things, what we tend to do is avoid pain, right? Walk away from, or at least give a familiar face that is, all of you know the experience of, if we can just sort of fuzz something up enough that it becomes familiar. So we don't try and identify it for what it is, but we say, well, it's enough like this, and I know how to handle this. This kind of feels like anger. And I know what to do with anger. What I do with anger is I go, call a girlfriend and go out and distract myself away from it, and then I won't be as angry anymore. So that takes the edge off, right? Sort of looks, sort of feels like anger. The fact that what it actually is despair that disguises itself as anger, that's not something that we do readily, because there is an edge, there is a rawness to the edges of these actual emotions. And so as a coach, what we want to be doing, both coaching ourselves and coaching others, is to get those edges back. You want to awaken the edges on a person. But by awakening those edges, putting those edges back on, because we can't do our work when the edges are numbed out. You cannot work with somebody that keeps just referring to being angry or being sad or being happy. You can't work with someone who just wants things to get better, the nameless, edgeless better, right? You can't even work with somebody who just wants to be healed. You can't work with somebody who wants to be strong. Those places don't have any edges. There's no form to that. There's no understanding of where you are in the map, right? If you don't really know where you are, you just kind of have this sense of sadness, and what you want is to feel happier or stronger or more confident. You're not working with a map. You're working with very generalized ideas. And so it's like you're both working in the dark. And so what we're able to do is you can put the edges back on, and the way that you can confidently put these edges, allow your client to feel the edges, or for yourself, is that we take the time to fully understand the emotions that they're having, these nuanced emotions and states that they're having. And we can understand them fully in a way where we can safely and lovingly allow them to feel the full vulnerability of having their edges back on. Because those raw edges, there's a sureness and a grace and a clarity that comes through having the proper language to describe them and to express them with. You guys all know this experience, right? So you know the fallacy of empathy, the fallacy of the idea that we can actually understand somebody else's experience. And as counselors and therapists and coaches and friends and parents and everything else, we often say that, right? We have to understand our emotions, and we have to understand the emotions of others. But we can understand the emotion itself. We can never understand the way somebody else is experiencing that emotion. And so language like this, the type of study that we have in exploring these nuanced emotions and states, allows us to not have to pretend we can understand or even imagine the experience, but it gives us the language to have them match their experience as closely as possible to something that actually allows them to feel like they are as close as they can get to somebody understanding their experience. So I want to give you my own example. You guys, I apologize because some of you have already heard me describe this, but I want you to go through your own experience and match this to what you have felt before. When I was reading this book, I was at a point, this last year has been hard on me, I say without shame, that 2021 has kicked my ass in a way that no other year in my 44 years has ever kicked my ass. And it's frightening when this happens, given the tools that I have, right? I mean, I walk, talk, breathe this. And so to be taken out and feeling unresourceful when I, have spent my life studying resources, is frightening. That's not the right word, but we'll get to the right word. Clearly, that's my point. So I was describing what I was feeling as stress, because that's what I felt. I felt stressed. And I knew that it wasn't my work specifically. I didn't want to. I love to coach. I feel like this is my calling. I feel like I am in the right place. That was my uplifting parts of my days, was coaching and training. So it wasn't that. It wasn't my family. I mean, I couldn't ask for it, blah, blah, blah. So I go through all the things. It's not the things, right? So it must just be that there's too much stress. So I have this very, helpful husband who kept offering to take things off my plate and to adjust things to reduce my stress and, all these things that we kept doing to lower my stress. And it just was not working. And so when I got this book and I sat down, and those of you who have read it already, you will have come across these distinctions. When I read that stress is when the stuff going on is just coming kind of too fast and there's too much. There's an overload to the system, right? So what you've got to do with somebody who is really, 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 really stressed is you have to alleviate worry. You have to alleviate anxiety. You have to alleviate the volume of stuff that is taking up emotional, mental, and physical strain and stress on the person, right? So she gives this beautiful example, those of you that read it, of being a waitress. And when a waitress comes in, or a waiter or a server, whatever the word is now, when it comes in and says, I'm really stressed, then the manager would be best served. And they seem to have an intuition here in her experience of, somebody get her drink, somebody take table 4, blah, blah, blah. And then she's okay, right? She can operate again. The load has lightened. And whenever people are stressed, that's the case, right? So you take away this worry, you do this, they're better. Now, overwhelm is a completely different structure. Overwhelm, when a person is overwhelmed, what's happening is that there is, in the weeds are blown. Yep. So when you are absolutely blown is the term she uses for when you're in like a restaurant environment. When a server comes in and says, I'm blown, they're overwhelmed. When your kid comes home and says, I'm overwhelmed, and they probably don't have the language to do so, but if what you recognize is overwhelm, what's happening now is so much has been on this person. So much is on that it's like entangled, it's like knotted. So if you can imagine that with stress, there's too much weight. It's like a pile of like wood, and you got to take some of the wood off to let them take a breath and get their feet under them again. With overwhelm, it's like a ball of yarn. It's just like intertwined, entangled. You can't take a piece off and expect there to be under any relief because it's all tangled up now. It's not, you can't take pieces away. With overwhelm, the neurology can no longer fire. You cannot make a decision when you're in overwhelm. And this is I'm sure you guys have all had it, where somebody offers to help you and it actually feels, instead of the relief you're expected to feel, you feel like crying. You feel like you're just going to get down on your knees and break because it doesn't help and it's not going to help. Or maybe you're optimistic that it will help and then it doesn't, then you feel like a failure and you feel even worse because why isn't it helping? Now my husband's doing the dishes, but still I feel like I can't stand up, right? All that stuff. That's overwhelm. With overwhelm, the way to resolve overwhelm is you have to clear the slate. Absolutely, completely take everything off. Clean slate, and then add things back one by one. And when you add back, I've done a lot of research since reading this because it's only a small little paragraph in the book. I have since gone deeper into it through a lot of her work. When there is overwhelm, you have to have that clearing, and it could be minutes. It literally could just be that you got overwhelmed in the last 3 hours and you need to go for a walk, clear the straight, put your music on, sing your brains out, dance around. And 10 minutes later, you've cleared the slate in your brain. You can come back, you can start fresh. It could, though, be hours that you need. It could be days, it could be weeks. And in some cases, it could literally be months. If you have been overwhelmed for years, it could be months that you need to just clear the slate. It literally could be forever. It could be that you got overwhelmed in the life you were living. You need to clear slate and start again differently. So overwhelm, when I read this, I was weeping because it was the first time that I had that relief of like, this makes sense. This is my experience right now. I'm not fucking stressed. I am overwhelmed. And so I have got to quit treating this like it's stress, and I've got to treat it like it's overwhelm. And I know you've had this experience. It was like when somebody, people describe stress, and I'm like, yeah, that's, it-ish. But when I got that definition of overwhelm, it was just like, that's it. That's the thing. When you have nuanced language of emotions, this is what you need to be doing for your clients. You need to have the language, because you cannot understand their experience through the way they're expressing it to you, because they're probably lacking in vocabulary, as most people are, lacking in understanding of the difference between these states. And so it's your job to go to them. And when you can go to them and say, okay, I'm going to offer a bunch of things here, and I want you to just listen and match the one that is most accurately like what you're experiencing, what you're feeling. And when you have the ability to do that, you give them the ability to identify and distinguish these subtleties that are so imperative and so important for them to understand about themselves, that they can then work with you to give you what you need to be able to lead them and guide them to a place that is actually going to be 100 times more successful than if we're shooting in the dark at this kind of like, well, you sort of feel disappointed. Okay, let's work with that as if it's an emotion. There's a bunch of addendums here, guys, and I will get to them because, of course, the work we do doesn't always necessitate language like this, but often it does. So I just want to finish up that experience of overwhelm. What is so interesting, and it's right there in the book, is she said, here's what's happening in the mind emotionally. When you're overwhelmed with something, and since then, you can imagine, I have talked to probably every client about it. When you're in overwhelm, you're feeling your emotions at a 10. Okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, you're feeling your emotions at a 10. You're noticing your emotions at a 5. So half of your attention is on what you're feeling, but half of your attention when you're overwhelmed is on all the noise outside of you. The diagnosis you just got, the person that just pissed you off, the thing that you just failed at, the thing that you're scared about. So half your attention is inward on what you're experiencing, and half your attention's out there on all those external things. And your understanding of your emotions is at about a 2. So run that through. Take a moment here, guys. Run that through your processor. Feeling emotions at a 10, paying attention to them at a 5, and understanding them at a 2. Think about what it's like to try and make a decision, any decision. I used to be a birth coach. You want to talk about overwhelm? Try being like 8 centimeters dilated and somebody asking you if you are thirsty and if you want some juice. And you feel like, come here, bring your face right here and ask me that again. That feeling of like, if you asked me to make a decision right now, right? And one of the things that I would always say to husbands was like, you don't ask her if she's thirsty and if she wants juice and what kind of juice she wants. You walk up to her with a glass of water in one hand and a glass of juice in the other, and you say, which one do you want right now? And you let her just take one because she cannot process decision in this moment. This is what it's like for all of us when we are overwhelmed. And so even coming into a coaching environment, so many people are overwhelmed and they don't realize they're overwhelmed, and we're asking them 1,000 questions. So one of the things that you can do as a coach is make sure that your client understands that what you're about to do is to clear the slate for them. For that 2 hours that they're sitting with you, if you can get them to understand and to be reassured that in these 2 hours, you can't control what happens outside of that, but we're clearing the slate. And those of you that know meditation, hypnosis and hypnotic language, if you can do a little, there's a whole bunch of ways if you have a client who can't seem to get there themselves. But if you have a resistant client, it may be that they are so overwhelmed, they just cannot cooperate. I mean, I sure as shit can't cooperate when I'm feeling my emotions out of 10, paying attention to them out of 5, and understanding them out of 2. Can't make decisions. So I would start there in terms of just how to use this stuff. And you don't need a whole lot of response, right? But if you know what's going on and you can give them that, they may not even realize that's the reassurance they need to even begin the work, but you know that. Okay. I just want to point out a few really cool things here. So that stuff I was saying, but feeling the edges. When you have language like this, there's so much edge that you can comfortably and confidently allow your client to feel. And Brene Brown says so beautifully in this book, and has said before, the center will hold. The center will hold. If we can feel the edges, the center will hold. When you don't know where those edges are, when you have numbed yourself out into these, very neutral sort of words, these generic words to describe our condition and our response, unfortunately, you lose the center. You can't know where the center is when you don't know where the edges are. So it's a pretty beautiful metaphor for you to hold as a coach, and for you if you're doing this work on yourself personally, right? Find the center, right? So wherever those edges are, acknowledge that you feel hopeless, acknowledge that you feel resigned, acknowledge that you feel self-pitying. Put those out there on the edge, and then remind yourself where your center is, and trust and know that that will hold as you pay attention to these. It's riskier to fudge them out, the edges, than to just go at them. And the way that you can do it is you go out to the edge, and when you have the words and when you understand these nuances and these differences, then you can hold its gaze, right? Okay, so we're going to do self-pity today. I know what you are. We're not going to pretend this is sadness today. We're going to call it by its name. And we are calling this self-pity. And I know what self-pity does. And I know what self-pity masquerades as. And so we're not going to go out there and pretend that a satisfaction is going to satisfy this. We're not going to go out there and pretend that confidence is going to satiate my self-pity. That's what I would do if I called it by a different name, but I am going to lock eyes with self-pity. And now I'm going to do what I know to do when that's what I'm feeling, right? So when you get a handle on this stuff, it's so much more powerful and empowering to be able to do that. There are some techniques. So I just want to add in here before we start going into, all I could do here was pick out the ones that I think are really cool to distinguish between. Do you provide the words for the client to help them with the? Can you just say that, Catherine?
Sorry, do you provide them with the words to help them identify the feelings? Because if they've only got the 3, all these other ones, it's like, oh, what are these?
100%. 100%. I will never, ever, ever again ask a client what they feel and accept their answer. That sounds terrible, but because it's probably not it, right? Like if somebody says, I just feel this sadness. No, I'm going to explore the other options. I'm going to say to them, okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you for expressing that. I'm going to try on a couple of things here. And I want you to just kind of match this to your own experience and see, maybe it is sadness. Maybe it is purely sadness. But I suspect it's probably some variation on sadness. And so I'm going to say a couple of things to you. And what I'm going to describe to them is grief, is loss, is hopeless, is heartbroken, is, and I'm going to describe these different things. And I have these succinct definitions that I'm gathering personally, that I'm gathering and putting in a place where I can access them. And then almost always, like I lit up to Overwhelm at like, holy shit, there may be a solution here, that they'll light up. They'll be like, yeah, that's it. That's the one. In a minute, I'm going to explain some of these. I've had some amazing experiences already with clients in being able to make these distinctions. So yeah, I will lend the language to them. I'll lend the experience to them, because it's not going to be exact. None of us can express exactly what it is, but we can get a heck of a lot closer than we have been by relying on these really insufficient words, emotions and states to get us through it. I don't worry about suggestion. You shouldn't worry about suggestion. You need to worry about suggestion when you're doing hypnotic work. You need to worry about suggestion if you're coming up with potential events that may have happened in their life, or ideas they may have about external events in their life. You need to worry about suggestion if you're offering ways to interpret other people's behavior. Then you need to be really, really careful. It would be absolutely unconscionable for me to say to somebody, have you actually considered that your husband might be lying to you? When he says that he's, working late, do you think he is working late, or do you ever question that? I should be immediately taken from my position and never allowed again in a room to coach or counsel another person, because that is suggestion. That is not okay, right? But when my client says to me, my husband's been working late a lot, and I don't know. I'm just feeling like, I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm getting more nervous. I don't know if I'm worried about, is this like a self-worth thing or whatever? Now, for me to say to her, okay, I'm going to try on a couple of things, and I want you to see how they fit your experience. Let's try on what it feels like when you had an expectation of, love in this way. And I might describe heartbreak, or I might describe loneliness, and I would describe, whatever. I would go through these different variations on her experience. That's not suggesting anything, because she's not going to latch on to one. She's not going to feel that reverberation, like that resonance of like, that's my experience. That's the experience I'm having. It's a lack of trust in myself, right? So I go to like self-trust. So sometimes people may describe this experience as like not feeling certain about their own decisions. And that makes them feel like they're not safe within themselves, and they're scared about what they're going to feel next, right? Yeah, that's what I feel. Okay, right? That they're not going to say that if that's not their experience. So don't worry about suggesting when it comes to their own direct experience. Just, you got to stay away from it when it comes to the interpretation of any external circumstance or person or another person. Okay. I don't know where I was going. Does anyone remember where I was going? Okay. I've covered all that. Okay. So let's go into some of the ones that are, yes. Okay. So we're going to go into some of the ones that are these near enemies. Okay. So like I said, going through her work, I've picked out some of the ones that I think are really imperative. Oh, sorry. This is what I was going to say. Trust is central to our work. I was at the techniques. Thank you, Laura. Thank you. So before I go to trust, our techniques sometimes don't require language, which is beautiful. A core transformation. When we're doing a core transformation, we don't need to identify the exact state, right? We have the beauty of that technique is that you can say to the person, think about a time when there was a part of you that felt what you just described as a sense of feeling unsafe, and just notice where that feeling is. And in fact, we don't even need to use the words. I will very often say, you're familiar with the feeling you have when you get into your car, right? I want you to notice now, think of a specific time where and when and with whom you've had that feeling getting into your car. Notice where it is in your body. And we don't even use language. So perfect, right? Absolutely perfect, because the experience that we're going for is to shift that direct experience of say it was a fear of driving or whatever, of getting into the car and getting it to its highest purpose and releasing it and letting it go and having it merge into the whole. And so that works perfectly. We don't need to do anything around states or emotion. None of that matters. All that matters is that they're familiar with the state or the emotion that they're in, the direct experience, and it shifts. But that's not true of the NLP work that we do. It's not true of belief shifts, right? So as soon as we get into trauma work, as soon as we get into submodality work, as soon as we get into limiting decisions and limiting beliefs, as soon as we get into parts integrations, all of that stuff, that does require language, especially beliefs, right? Especially beliefs. So when you're constructing, when you're releasing and letting go and shifting an old belief, you really want to make sure language does dictate where the experience is going to go, right? So if somebody says, I have a belief that I'm not confident, I don't think it's good enough. I don't think that's good enough to be able to place it on the map. You've got to know where you are on the map so that you can know where you're going, right? And you want to know where you're going. And I like how my hands disappeared. You want to know where you're going on the map, and you want to go to the right place. You really don't want to make the mistake of bringing a person from a belief, I am not confident enough, to I'm strong, when that doesn't really fit their experience, but they're just going along with you. And your client, usually clients are A, really want change. B, they're usually very polite. My clients are usually polite. I don't get a lot of clients who, I get some, a few of you guys actually. Who will actually point out when I've got it wrong. Because you guys, I've worked with almost all of you. And I get pretty passionate, right? You guys have seen me when I get all excited, when I'm like, what if I think I've just had this thought, is this the experience? And is it like this belief? And I get excited about it. And it can, I have to temper that as, one of my things to work on as a coach. It's because it's hard then as the client to be like, actually, Tara, no, that actually isn't what I believe, or that isn't how I was feeling, right? It takes, people tend to want to agree, even clients. So by having a greater array and understanding and nuanced understanding of emotions and states, you're going to avoid more of that, right? So when you're doing beliefs, you need to make sure it really fits, and trust is central because your client needs to trust you. And even though they may outwardly be trusting you as a coach and they want to trust you and all that kind of stuff, have you ever seen the shift when your client's been like, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, I hear you, compared to you get something, you get their experience, and they go, yeah, yes, oh my God, yes, that's it. And nobody has been able to say it that way. I've never, right? And you've given them that, if you had a trust scale between you and your client, when that happens, it just it gets so amplified. And now you've got their unconscious and their conscious totally in your place where you can create the most positive change. And you can do that far more effectively when you've got a wider array and experience of these emotions and these states. Okay. So let's start with, most of this I sort of have memorized because I've been in this book so deep, but I also don't want to screw this up. So I'm going to start with the definition of discouragement and resignation. Yeah. So this was really, really, I'm pulling out these few examples, and then I'll take a vote at the end. And if you guys want to do a separate night where we actually go deeper into this, I would be more than happy to do that, just for kicks, just for fun, because it's so brilliant. We could just do a big masterclass on it, all together. But let's talk about the difference between discouragement and resignation. This to me, and all of you who are trained the way that you guys are trained, are going to appreciate this so much, if you haven't already read it and done this on your own. So here's how I had to eat some humble pie. Here's how I have messed this up before. I've said to my clients, okay, let's work with this belief that you don't have the ability to move on, right? So say it's like a project and they give up and they have this pattern of giving up on things, and they want me to help them have the resilience or the ability to move forward, right? To push through that. So I might say something like this to them. I go, okay, I want you to think about a time when you had this belief that you couldn't push past it. You get this feeling of like defeat, resignation, or just feeling really down on yourself. And they go, yeah. What I've done there is I've clumped together these emotions and states that are not the same. They do not share the same engine. They don't share the same qualities. And interestingly, so this was so enlightening to me when I read the difference between discouragement and resignation. So discouragement is, and I'm going to my memory here, discouragement is when you look at the effort required to achieve a certain result or a certain outcome, and you do not have faith in yourself or believe in yourself to be able to put forth that effort to create the outcome. Okay, so let that sink in for a minute. So it's about the effort required. Think about a time when you've said, I just feel so discouraged, right? Again, I would run into this in birthing all the time. Women get discouraged because they're halfway through their labor, right? So, or, so many of us have felt this feeling. I know how much effort's going to be required, or I think I know how much effort's going to be required, and I just don't know if I've got it. That's discouragement. Resignation, feeling resigned, means you no longer believe in the outcome as being possible. When you feel resigned, you no longer believe the outcome is possible. That is a completely different beast. You're dealing with two completely different things. A person who is discouraged still believes the outcome is possible. They're just scared they don't have what it takes in the tank to get there. A person who is resigned doesn't even believe it's possible anymore. That is so monumental. And I think that like intuitively, I maybe sort of knew that-ish, like if a woman came in and said, I just feel so discouraged about my marriage, in contrast to a woman who comes in and says, I just feel resigned in my marriage. I think I would have like subtly sort of energetically picked up on a difference there, but I didn't have the tools. I would not have been able to identify one woman needs to figure out how to believe in the effort required to achieve the result that she wants. One woman, I need to reinstate her belief that the result is even possible. I can't describe to you. Do you guys just give me like nods of your head how different you would coach those two scenarios? That's like night and day in terms of what I have to do for my client to get them to a place where they're going to feel like I have helped them. So this book is full of stuff like that. There's another amazing distinction between envy and jealousy. We have a tendency to be, those of us, we're all here in the Judeo-Christian culture. So even those of you who may not ascribe to a Christian belief, or, we still happen to live in Canada in a society that is dominantly culturally influenced by these Judeo-Christian ideas. Those ideas hold within them the idea that envy is a sin. It's biblical. It's one of the deadly sayings. It's one of the things that you are not supposed to have envy. And therefore, research shows us none of us really like to say it. It's like an ugly word, right? To be envious is this kind of ugly thing that we do that is very, very, I don't know, it's just kind of an ugly thing. Whereas jealousy is a little lighter. Jealousy, we can say, there's cute little terms for being jealous, like, oh, I'm just so jealous of your, pants, or I'm just so jealous of your relationship or your whatever. But these are very, very, very different emotions. I'm jelly. Yeah, that's what she says. I'm so jelly. The difference between these, whether you experience it that way or not, is still incredibly important to understand within yourself. So jealousy as a structure, as like an emotion, requires the idea that there is somebody or something that is taking something away from you. So jealousy requires a triangle or some other interesting form. So jealousy is about the fear that something or someone can take something that you currently have or believe you have or attached to. Yeah. Jessica is jealous of the attention that her boyfriend gives to the dog. It's true. Right? So there's always this quality of it's something that you have that can be taken away. That's really unique in its structure, right? You know the work you'd have to do as a coach with somebody who has an other that they're directing all of that about, right? In contrast to envy, envy is wishing we have something that we don't currently have. So envy is that state of it has nothing to do with the other or another or a triad or anything about losing. Envy is about wanting something that you don't yet have. Very, very, very different. If a client comes in and says to you, you know, and I have it all the time. I don't know about you guys, but I have so many, majority of my clients at some point have to deal with what they call jealousy, what I was accepting as jealousy. It wasn't jealousy that they were experiencing. When you look on Facebook and you see somebody who has, you know, a beautiful trip with their new honeymoon person and your, you know, marriage is a little stale and dead, you're not experiencing jealousy, you're experiencing envy. And so like these distinctions are just, you don't want to lump that in with the feeling that they get when their boyfriend showers attention on the dog. These are different things, very different things. So the other one that's very, very interesting is resentment. She goes into resentment, and resentment, she felt, was in the category of anger, right? Most of us, and again, one that I work with all the time that I had to eat some humble pie about when I did this work, resentment is something that we feel as anger. The expression of it is usually anger, right? You say things like, I feel the resentment boiling up in me. Resentment is often toward people that are close to us in some way. So whether it's peers or spouses or children even, or parents or family or whatever. And the experience of resentment, she discovered through research, is actually in the family of envy, not in the family of anger. Resentment always requires this look in the self. It's something that you don't have, that somebody else does have, that you are super pissed off that they allow themselves to have it and you don't. So if you think about resentment, when you feel resentment towards your husband, who this Sunday just sat on a chair for 3 hours and read a book in the middle of the day. And when you walk in the house after having driven the kids around all morning and feel this very palpable resentment, even though you've been telling him to friggin' chill out and relax for the last 16 years. But when you feel that sense of resentment towards somebody, if you can ask yourself the question, what is this person doing or having that I can't allow myself to do or have? You will always get an answer, always. And it's the most beautiful thing because you can deal with your resentment all by yourself. You still may not love the behavior of the other, right? It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to be like, you know, totally cool and chill with everybody's behavior. It just means that you don't have to waste all that energy directing it outward where you can't make any change. And instead, you can actually notice what it is inside of you that you may want to consider giving yourself permission to do or have or be, right? We, think resentment is So again, such an important one as a coach to know how to work with effectively. And what I had been doing in the past, of course, was assuming that when I'm releasing resentment or when I'm creating new strategies or when I'm working with parts that are resentful or any of that kind of stuff, I'm looking for them to get to a place of like acceptance or understanding or compassion. That's not going to be effective long term. That's going to feel good in the moment, but it doesn't have the legs. It doesn't have the roots to be able to carry into a future situation, play it out, and actually not feel it. You've got to allow the person to go into that place of envy and uncover what it is that they're denying themselves. That changes my practice. I mean, that alone changes the way that I deal with women who are going through resentment. Again, a lot of the work that we do, I mean, not to, it's not as though I'm going to call back all my old clients and, and do it again because, like I'm not, because so much of the work didn't require an identification of this to begin with. And I think intuitively, I, like many of you probably have noticed a lot of this without articulating it in our cognitive mind. We've been able to work with it. And I think very often when we're releasing stuff, we are releasing the right things, and we are getting to the right places and all that kind of stuff. And we are merging the right parts and everything else. It's just really, 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 really helpful and probably more expedient and more satisfying and more fulfilling and confidence boosting for yourself as a coach when you can create these connections with language and with understanding and with everything it offers. Another cool one, what time is it? 8:40. Okay, another cool one is disappointment and regret. Those ones are so neat to distinguish between. Sally, I love it. I can hear you even though I can't hear you. Disappointment almost always has to do with something that we had no control over in the first place. So I have definitely made the mistake of assuming that these are related to each other. But disappointment is always, if you explore your own emotional past, your own, do a little audit on your own emotions. Disappointment is when we feel we did not have any control over the situation and we're disappointed, we're upset, we're disappointed that the thing didn't happen or we didn't get what we wanted or whatever. So this will be like, when you were really counting on getting into this school. No, see, that could be different. Hang on. So if you were going to go to this concert and then it gets canceled and you're really, really disappointed because you were so excited to go. That's pure disappointment. There's nothing you could do. And all you get to feel about that is disappointment. If somebody external to yourself where you don't have control, that's going to feel like disappointment, purely like disappointment. I'll go back to that school one in a second because that's relevant. Regret, on the other hand, every time you're going to feel as though you had something to do with the outcome. You feel regretful about the things that you believe you did have control over. Regret is, I wish I hadn't made that decision to yell at my kid. Regret is, I wish I hadn't chosen this restaurant to go to. Where this gets, so that example that I just almost gave, you get the feedback from the school saying you applied and you didn't get in. That's going to be a little combo, right? That's going to be partially disappointment because there are some things there that you couldn't control, right? There's 20,000 students that applied and they only picked 3,000. So there's an element of disappointment about the things you can't control. The fact that 20,000 people applied for these 3 positions or whatever. But there also likely will be an element of regret, right? I wish I had just not gone to that party and studied for that, exam, that LSAT, that whatever. I could have probably increased my percentage by 5%. I wish I had made different choices back then. The reason this is important is because if you're able to distinguish those two, how, I don't know if I've talked about it here or with you guys individually, it's always useful, always, always, always at any point in your life. If you ever feel stuck or unhappy or upset, or I don't care what the situation is in your life, there's always value in just stopping where you are, stopping, full stop, and saying, okay, what can I control and what is outside of my control? What is within my control? What is outside of my control? At any point in your life, always, those two lists are valuable to you and will add clarity to whatever emotion you're feeling. Regret and disappointment, if you happen to be dwelling in the past, is how you might be able to do this even more effectively. So when I go through my past, what a beautiful exercise to be like, okay, because I don't know about you, but I've done this with my clients where we try and sort of clear like regret. Clearing disappointment, you can do that. Clearing regret, not a chance. We're dealing with individual, very, very different things, right? Regret's not the emotional experience. Regret is the state that you get into because of the choices or the decisions that you made where you did have control. And the only way to feel better about that is to change your future. Regret, because it's about what you can control, affects your future. Disappointment has nothing to do with what you can control, therefore has nothing to do with your future. Therefore, you can clear it. You can't clear regret. You need to go to what specifically do you regret about that decision? Oh, you trusted the guy who wanted to hold your wallet? Okay, why don't we talk about that specific feeling, thought, and behavior? Now we can get some traction, right? Regret has to do with the only way that you get rid of regret in your life, the only way is to know that you will not repeat that behavior in the future. As soon as you know that for sure, regret will disappear like that. It's gone. It no longer can exist. Structurally, it has to disappear. As soon as you have absolute confidence that you will never, ever again have that behavior in the future. So these distinctions are so infinitely useful for you as a coach. And I would take the time, with my client to explore this together. This is not turning into talk therapy because you're not indulging the story. You're not asking for like, tell me more about what your neighbor said that night, right? You're not saying like, tell me more about how that started. Like, that's not what you're doing. You're saying, tell me more about your experience, your direct experience of that event. If it's not quite fitting, there's probably a way to make it fit even more accurately so that we can get to the place that is going to be most useful. There's so many more. Trust. Trust is such a beautiful one to explore, to understand. Her definition of trust, actually it's Charles Fettman's definition of trust, which she has adapted and brought in, is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. Say it again. Trust is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. So you take something you value, like your dream, your hopes, and you give it to somebody else by expressing it. And what you're doing is saying, I trust you enough to make this vulnerable to whatever you do with it, whatever you say about it, whatever judgment you cast on it, however you allow it to shape your view of me. I'm going to let it be vulnerable to this person. I have sat and explored this definition of trust, and it fits every single time, without fail. If you're offering trust, that's what you're doing. Where there's a real cool calibration here is to notice the things that you do value and what you don't value. So if you can measure your client, if your client says, I just don't trust anybody, you've got a ton of assumptions that you could make erroneously if you don't know how to explore that properly. So when somebody says, I don't trust anybody, I have a problem trusting anybody, where's the difficulty? You can make the assumption that means any number of things, right? But what you're doing for sure is laying your own lens onto what that person values, what that person experiences vulnerability about, and what that person experiences as safe or not safe. You can't do that. You can't do that to another person because you don't know. I don't care how well you know them. I couldn't do it to my husband. I couldn't do it to my best friend because I'm not entirely sure what their hierarchy of value is and the things that they most value. And I'm not entirely sure how they experience their own vulnerability in the hands of somebody else. And I'm not entirely sure what safety is for them, right? So I may say, I have no problem trusting people, right? And I say that to you truthfully. I have long been known for my gullibility, my inappropriate trust. Alan, probably has ulcers because of how much he worries about what he considers over trust of people. But the interesting part in trusting is, what is it that I'm doing? Is it that I have lessened value on certain things? So I can put them out there and let them be at the mercy of, let them be vulnerable to somebody else because my value of it isn't that high, right? It could be a really destructive thing, or it could be a real beautiful quality in me. But it could be any of those. You can't know until you start asking me questions about how to pull trust apart, right? Trust is cognitive. But you trusting strangers with your unlocked car? Who is ZMA group? I don't even know who I'm talking to.
Sorry, Tara, it's me, Major Bean.
Oh, hi, Major Bean. Yes. Yeah, I don't lock anything. I don't, anyway, that's a whole other, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, totally. Trust, interestingly, is a cognitive process. So when you get into the core of it, the essence of it, it becomes heart-centered, sure. But it's actually a cognitive process to choose trust or to not choose trust. And you need it to be. You don't want somebody's unconscious mind guiding them toward trust or not trust. That is a very unsafe thing to do to your client. What you want your client to do is have absolute confidence in their cognitive ability to make a call on trusting or not trusting. Again, crucial to your coaching, right? The differences between emotions and states that are best in the hands, because your self-trust is about putting the things that you consider to be valuable, allowing them to be vulnerable to your own actions. Think about that. Self-trust is that is still a relationship between you and yourself. You can't escape it. I mean, again, unless you're like a floating Buddha and you are one whole being who has no parts, then you're dealing with self-trust. The fact that self-trust would even be like a thing to you means that you still have parts that have to trust each other or not trust each other, right? Understanding how to pull this stuff together and how to understand, okay, do I want to put this aspect, this decision-making part of me or whatever into my own cognitive place, or do I want to trust myself to make this decision from my heart? And I promise you, there are lots of decisions in life that you do not want to be making from your heart. You best not make a decision about do I invest here or do I invest here with your heart? That's not what your heart is made of. You need to make that decision about should I go with RBC or BMO? Make that cognitively, please. That's what it requires, cognitive assessment, right? Just because we work with the unconscious mind and we are emotional beings doesn't mean that we didn't evolve to have this massive prefrontal cortex and the neocortex. It serves a purpose. As a coach, you want to be able to guide people very skillfully into which of these states they want to have sort of cognitive dominance and where you want to have heart dominance. right? Or intuitive dominance, or, whatever else it is. This book allows you to do that. It creates a really good map anyway to navigate through that stuff, right? I have, and I will tell you this from I've witnessed a lot of our coaches who don't end up being very skillful coaches because they only want to coach from their heart. And it's beautiful, but it's not skilled. And I think at this level of coaching, if you're an NLP coach, if you're a different kind of coach, if you're like a energy healer or whatever, whatever, all heart. I guess that's like a wholehearted thing. If you're a vital body, if you're a second body, vital body practitioner, you're probably doing it fully from your energetic being and your heart and everything else. But if you are an NLP coach, you need to make sure you are coaching from a place of skill, from cognition, and can figure out where these emotional states and emotions and states are best motivated from, best decided from. It's 9 o'clock, almost. It's 5 to 9. I have more, but I would like for you guys to ask questions or to comment or to add. Those of you that have read this book, if you're willing to share what has struck you. There's a whole, I went into the negative emotions. There's a whole beautiful half of the book that's all on positive emotions, which is as useful to identify those really specifically, so that when you are leading your client, you can lead them even more skillfully into what is going to best serve them, right? Let me do one more. Sorry, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to do one more really quickly. Defensiveness. Defensiveness is such a cool one to understand. And it's, I think all of us kind of know that, if you're doing this kind of work, you already know more than your average Joe that like defensiveness is going to be about your fragile ego. So why we get defensive, obviously. But what's cool is that the opposite of fragile ego, which is almost always where defensiveness is rooted, is to have grounded confidence. So in these I keep forgetting the word, near enemies, grounded confidence comes from fully accepting that you are flawed, that you are imperfect, that you are, in Brene Brown's words, awkward, clumsy, so totally imperfect, and absolutely accepting of that and confident anyway. That's the opposite. That's what's going to get your client out of defensiveness, not indulging the ego to feel better about themselves, which is a temptation. It's a temptation when people feel defensive to build them up, right? You don't have to be defensive because you're amazing at your job and you're blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Bullshit. That's not going to do anything. That's not going to help them. That's going to boost their ego for a little while, even if you were to do a belief. When we get learnings, and some of you have had the experience of me interrupting your learnings when they get like overly bright and flowery and sunshiny and star brighty, because there has to be, in this grounded confidence, in order to be able to stay there, there must be an absolute acknowledgement that every single learning that you have about your good qualities can counter the fact that you are inherently flawed because you are a human being. And if you can't notice that, good night, Joel, thanks for being here. If you can't notice that flawed self and have the learning be in spite of it, then the learning itself isn't useful, right? So when you can recognize these things, when you can actually lead your client to a grounded confidence, I don't feel like I'm doing my client any good if where we get to is some form of you're fantastic. It's doing your client good when you say, okay, you're going to continue to bump up against your own shit all the time, because that is the condition of being human. I'm sorry. And you are going to be challenged. And every time you resolve something, you're going to run into a new problem. and you're going to mess up and you're going to feel stupid and you're going to feel weak and you're going to feel all these things. But here's the good news. With everything that we've done, you are going to be way more resilient. And you're not going to let your self-worth ever be diminished ever again because of your flaws. Because if you let your self-worth be diminished by your flaws, you will get defensive and your ego will start to control everything. Good night, Jess. So that quality, that ability to know that your self-worth stays intact is where all the beauty lies.